Tonight is part two of Geoffrey Griffin's COM Add-Ins presentation. There was so much material in the previous meeting that we went long and we still didn't have a chance to see everything that we wanted to see. So Geoffrey was very gracious in agreeing to come back and presenting part two of that as COM Add-Ins for Access, well, for Office, I guess. Before we jump into the presentation, I want to just briefly touch on a couple of things. I keep an eye on the Access roadmap, and as you all know, there have been no changes recently. So whatever was on there last month, SQL, Monaco editor, and I forget what was the other thing. Nothing has changed. The Microsoft engineering priorities are still as we were told recently. They're continuing their focus on their monthly issue fixes. They're investigating large monitor support. I understand there's a meeting being scheduled or has happened already between some of the MVPs and the development team on that topic. So I think that is moving forward. And the third-party integrated source control that they're going to put back in. And in anticipation of that, I have scheduled a presentation for February on a third-party visual, or not, I want to say visual source safe, which is from decades ago, a source control tool. And I'll get back to that later when I give you a quick preview of what the February presentation is, but it's about a visual source. I keep saying visual, and I apologize, about a source control tool. And of course, we still have the Discord server out there. I think it's kind of stable. It doesn't grow or it doesn't shrunk. It's still available. If you're interested, I had a brief conversation with Ben Sasarich this morning, in fact, on a problem he was having. And if he shows up, which he may or may not, I'll ask him to review the problem because we did not resolve it. So it's a good place to do that kind of thing. And I just kind of like to review quickly online chapters of the AUG group. And what I know are the two in-person and virtual conferences scheduled for this year. Access Italia is going to do how to make standard controls more user-friendly. That's on the 14th of this month. The same day, SQL with Access with SQL Server. Their presentation is Data Ingesting Pipeline from Azure IoT Hub with Roy Kim. Roy Kim is an Azure MVP, and so he's going to present that, how to ingest data from IoT. Access Basic this month on the 21st. They're going to be talking about table relationships, and I think Steve Owen gave the last one, so he'll be back. Kent, do you want to tell us what you're going to do this month on the 16th or the 17th, depending on which side of the ocean you're on? Do you have a schedule yet, a topic? I didn't see one.
No,
Okay.
I haven't figured it out yet.
Okay. That one will remain TBA. No problem. Access Lunchtime is going to be talking about dictionaries and collections to work with JSON. And Maria will be doing that one on the 28th. On the 5th of February, Access Europe is going to be looking at VBA extras and add-in, which John Mallinson has created. It's been compared to MZ Tools in some ways, so I'm looking forward to that one. And in February, this group, I've asked Adam Waller, who has a GitHub site called Joyful Service, where he offers an Access version control tool. And I've seen a presentation on this. I forgot where I saw it. Someone else gave it about this. And so I contacted Adam directly and asked him if he would come and tell us about it. I think it's timely because, as I say, Microsoft is planning to bring it back. So it'll help us understand where all of the, what the direction might be and what the alternatives might be. And Access Day is scheduled for March That's in Redmond, around the MVP Summit. If you're coming to town for the MVP Summit, you probably want to stay an extra day and go to Armenstein's Access Day. And of course, Carl Donabauer has his Access DevCon in Vienna in April. That's a 2-day conference. And that one is, I think it's going to be online again. It was last year, and I think that's going to be the case. So,
I sorry to interrupt,
sure.
George. I think Peter mentioned the other day, Peter During, was that I may have got this completely wrong, so don't actually quote me, but I think they said they weren't going to do both anymore. But I might be completely misquoting and confusing it with something else. Just thought I'd share that.
I'm a bit hesitant. Other than that, I found the dates on his website today. I'm a bit hesitant to say what exactly it is going to be because I haven't talked to Carl for quite a while. But it's coming up. So I'm going to turn the time back to Geoffrey L. Griffith to talk about creating add-ins that run in Access and Office. So if you're ready, I will stop sharing.
Great. Can you see it now?
Good to go.
Okay, great. Okay, great. So you all can see the screen, hopefully. And you know me, Geoffrey L. Griffith. I gave the presentation last month, so we're just going to go ahead and finish up the stuff that we didn't talk about last time for creating COM Add-Ins with VSTO. And before we get started again, I just want to remind everybody that you can download the sample files from here. And just a quick reminder, I'm going to back out of this and I'll show you the sample files. When you download the files, there was the block on there because of, actually, I guess, I haven't unblocked it yet. So there, I guess it has installers and scripts and all kinds of files that Microsoft or Google consider dangerous. So when you download the files, you might have to check unblock and hit apply like that, and then maybe unzip it. And hopefully when you unzip it, you won't have any problems. But George originally had a problem with paths being too long, so he moved it up to a lower, a shorter route path to unzip it, and it unzipped fine apparently, I think. So hopefully you can see those. If you have that problem, you can just move it to a shorter path. And in here, really, there's 3 sets of files again. There's one for each demo, and then I just have a sample Word document here. So the first one, really quick, is just the actual add-in to go ahead and install it and use it in Word. So that's that. We talked about that last time. The second set of files, this is where we ended last time, is a C# project in the first folder and a VB project in the second folder, both showing how to make the basic add-in parts through VSTO and Visual Studio. So that's where we kind of stopped last time, and we'll start here again this time. And then the last set of demo files. I'm sorry, and I should say, per Adrian's question last time, inside each one of these folders is the Visual Studio solution file, which if you double click that, it'll open the whole thing in Visual Studio, and it has all the source files in the folder under that. So you can see the actual source files for the project there if you need to look at those, or you want to look at those outside of Visual Studio. And the same is true for the VB project as well. We have a solution file and we have all the source code files. And again, these 2 solutions are basically identical. They're both just the basic add-in parts for a Word add-in, but one created in C# and the second is created in Visual Basic. And then finally, the third demo I'll do is the full add-in. And I just want to kind of talk about all the source code files that I used to create this add-in for Word for using Crystal's Word property editor tool. And there's a few tricks in there. There is a few more files in here than the other C# projects, but we'll get to that, real shortly. So hopefully that makes sense and everybody understands that you can download the files, the sample files for this project if you need to. If you want to go along with me. Okay, so you guys know who I am. We talked about my bio last time. I'm just going to go ahead and just bypass that. And I kind of said again the agenda. We talked about the background and definitions last time. and I showed Crystal's Word add-in demo that I created, or the Word document editor demo that I made. And then we did a discussion of what COM is and how add-ins work and how to install VSTO. And then we kind of ended on this demonstration, which was the second demo, which was creating a simple COM add-in using VSTO. And so we'll kind of just start here. And then for the third demo, it's the complete code for the Word add-in. And then lastly, we'll just discuss the drawbacks of COM add-ins and VSTO and some other issues. And I'll ask for final questions and give you some additional resources. I will continue forward here. Again, you guys kind of already know what the background of this project is, but basically I just made this Word add-in through VSTO tools that works with Crystal's document property editor that she showed to the group in December 2023. So we're doing a project on that now and showing that. And I told you what COM is. It's part of the component object model. It was a technology that was released by Microsoft in the early 90s. I think everybody's familiar with COM and the fact that all of the Office desktop apps are basically built in COM. So it uses COM. And a COM add-in is just an add-in that utilizes the COM add-in methods in a COM application. So we'll just continue forward. And I talked to you last time about what Visual Studio tools for Office are. And it's just a package of code projects, some templates, some resource files, that kind of stuff for building tools for the Microsoft Office desktop apps. The key thing here is really these tools are for the desktop apps and not necessarily really for the web app or the phone app or any other clients really. So just kind of pass through that as well. And the first demo, which we talked about last time, was Crystal's tool and as an add-in for Word. And so just kind of show that again. If you wanted to install that, that's in the first set of demo files. And if you just want to install, you can run the install add-in.batch file. That batch file will install the VSTO installer that's included here at the bottom and add a couple reg keys and stuff so you can use and try out Crystal's Word document editor as a Word add-in. And when you install it, you'll get this install prompt like this. It says unknown publisher because we didn't sign the files, but it's okay. You can just click install. That will do the installation for Word and do all the registration to make the add-in work with Word. And then once you open a document in Word, once you've installed it and you open the document in Word, you can see that on the add-ins tab, there'll now be a button there called Property Editor. And if you click that, it will open up Crystal's Word document editor. So that's a pretty cool, neat little tool, I think. And it's nice that you can just do it straight from Word. And that's kind of the power of creating these Word add-ins. So moving forward, if you want to remove a COM add-in, it's not quite the same. I did create an uninstall script, but to remove it from Word, you'll need to go into the File tab and go to the Office options. And then on the options dialog, there'll be an add-ins tab. And way at the bottom will be a COM add-ins box with a go button. It says go for some reason. So if you click that, it will open to this COM add-ins dialog in Word. And if you want to remove it, you can just select it and then click remove. That'll take it out. Or if you just want to disable the COM add-in, you could just uncheck the box and hit OK. The add-in will still be installed with Word. It just won't be loaded each time. So that's the options for removing COM add-ins from Word, and that's true for all the Office apps. They're not on the add-ins that you see on the home menu. That's not on this add-ins button here. It's separate. So just keep that in mind. And then we've talked about the benefits of COM add-ins, so I'm just going to kind of continue forward here so we can get up to where we were last time. And we talked about the requirements for creating a VSTO add-in. You just need Microsoft Office, Visual Studio 2022, or a recent version, and then just the Visual Studio tools for Office. And when you install Visual Studio, to make sure you get those Visual Studio tools for Office, you want to in the install dialog, go under other tool sets and choose the Office SharePoint development option there. If you've already installed Visual Studio, but you did not install this during the setup, you can always go to your tools menu and then choose the Get Tools and Features options to add the Office and SharePoint development component as well, if you want to go ahead and create VSTO add-ins. That's the end there. And that basically gets us back to where we were when I ended last time. Was there any questions at this point?
I'll just point out that you can use the complete free Visual Studio 2022 Community Edition. You don't need the full edition for that.
So that was the community edition.
Oh yeah, there you go. Okay,
and
just
to
being
be able
sure.
to, yeah, sorry.
Not
Sorry,
a
I'll
problem.
I'll go back to that really quick. Yeah, so really, yeah, you bet the community edition is free. If you want to use the pro edition, that will work as well. But the key is when you install either the free edition or a paid edition,
Oh,
you definitely have to select the other tool sets and the Office
Oh.
SharePoint development component there.
my apologies. You did put the free edition in there, so I didn't see
It's
that.
okay, no problem, no problem. It may not have been clear. I know I'm really burning through this stuff that we covered last time, so I apologize. If there's anything that's unclear, please feel free to ask me now.
I would only comment that like Albert, I sort of saw that, but it went before I could check it properly, as it were. So I'm glad we revisited that. Is what I'm saying.
Yeah, absolutely. It is a little tricky, and if you don't, yeah, it's kind of a ways down too. So when you install, you got all this stuff in your face, and then it just shows you this huge list of components, and you have to kind of scroll way down to the bottom to basically get to this. Right? It's like not at the top. You can see the thing here.
Yeah.
So hopefully that makes sense to people. It is a little bit hidden, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Unless there's any more questions, I'll just continue forward here. So the second thing we did was talk about, the second demo we talked about was creating a COM add-in, just the basic COM add-in for Word using VSTO. Again, I'll run through this real quick and then we'll just open the code. But again, my presentation has all the steps you need to actually do it. So if this is like step by step, I've kind of just made a click through here. All you have to do is basically start Visual Studio, choose create a new project, and then you can search for the VSTO and you can choose, if you wanted to, you could choose the language, C# or VB. In this case, I've chosen the Word VSTO add-in, and then you just hit next. Then you basically come to the project name dialog and you give it a project name and a path. And then a version of the .NET framework, I just used .NET 4.8, which was the default on my machine. It probably works with many, many different versions of .NET framework, but that's the default for me. And then I just hit create. And basically, once you do that, that gives you this sort of opens up Visual Studio with this template opened up in it. And in the Solution Explorer in mine, it's moved to the right. I forgot in the default, when you have Visual Studio installed by default and you haven't moved the panes around, the Solution Explorer, I believe, is actually on the right side. So it's like the Solution Explorer pane and then the code pane and then like the properties pane over here. I just sort of merge all these together as one pane. So all my panes are on the right side. So if you see the Solution Explorer here, you'll see that we have this Word add-in project for C#. And then there's a couple of references and a property, but the important thing is this add-in.cs, this add-in.cs file. And that's where basically all the magic happens. I've opened that here in the code pane, so you can kind of just see it gives you two sort of templated methods, which is the startup and then the shutdown for the actual add-in itself. And it's funny because actually from the presentation that Philippe gave yesterday, Adrian had a wonderful question about when this startup fires and when this shutdown fires. And actually, I think Colin had a good question about what happens during shutdown. So I'll talk about both those in a minute, but just know that these two methods are sort of just given to you by default in the template under this add-in.cs. So the next thing to do is actually to add a new item to the project. So you just go project menu, add new item, and then we can choose under the add new item dialog, we can choose the ribbon XML. So we want to add a custom ribbon, so we can have that button on our add-ins ribbon. And this is how we'll do it. So we choose ribbon XML, we choose a name. I use custom ribbon.cs, and then just click the add button. And then when you do that, it'll take you back to Visual Studio, and you'll see that it's added 2 files to the solution, the custom ribbon.cs and the custom ribbon XML file. And the really nice thing is in the custom ribbon CS, it actually tells you all the steps you need to do to implement this ribbon in your application. It's kind of just commented out here, but you can see the first thing is that we're just going to add this override method for create ribbon extensibility object to our this add-in.cs file. So to do that, we'll just flip back over to our this add-in.cs file, and I just copied and pasted that code into there and uncommented it, so it's actually not commented out. And then the next thing to do is edit our ribbon XML to show that. We talked about this a lot last time, so I'll just run through this really quick. I don't need to go too deep into this, but oops, shoot, let me go back one. Basically, the code that I added here was the tab tag. So everything here, between here and here, was code I added. There's a couple lines in there by default, just generic stuff, but basically we just need this information to add our button to the add-ins ribbon tab in Word. So the settings for that, on the tab tag, on this highest level tag, all we need to do is set one attribute, which is IDMSO, and we'll set that to tab add-ins. That's so we specify to show it on the add-ins tab. I don't think you can specify anything else there, by the way, either. I think it has to be tab add-ins in this case. If you try to do the home tab or something, the button will not show up there. And maybe it's possible, I just don't know how to do it, but it wasn't working for me on a basic test. So I think it has to be tab add-ins there. For the next lower tag, which is the group tag, we need to specify the ID and the label for the group. So I just used group prop edit and then the properties label. This is the text that shows up as the ribbon group is shown on the ribbon. So that's the label. The text name is displayed on the ribbon. And then the last part is the button control itself. And so you can see I've added a button tag here. And the important properties are really these 5. The ID is the name of the variable name of the button. The label is the text that's displayed for the button. The size is basically I set it to large, so you can see the large icons. You can set it to large or normal, or just leave it out. If you leave it out, it'll be small or normal size, what they call normal, but it's really small. You can set that just by setting normal or just by leaving it out. So that's how you can set the size on that ribbon image. And then the on action and get image attributes are callbacks to the function names that we will call to do their specific tasks. So going back here, you notice on action, I created on property edit click, which is a method we're going to add to our ribbon CS class. And then get property edit icon, which is another method we're going to add to our ribbon CS class. And so we'll continue forward. And you can see here, I've basically done that already in my code, in my pre-made code here. Basically, we have the get property edit icon method, and that returns a bitmap image. And all I really do in this method is just return a generic file image path right now for now, but we'll set the right image path in a minute. And then on prop edit click, which is the button click itself on the ribbon, this is where your code will actually run. So I've just kind of put a comment in here for now. And then the last thing we need to do is we need to add our images. So we'll just click the project, add existing item, and I don't have, I'm actually missing a dialog here that shows where you can choose an image and select that image, but you'll notice now that there's an icon PNG file added here to the Solution Explorer. And if we right click on that and choose properties, it'll take us to the properties for the icon image. And we just want to set the build output, the copy to output directory, to copy if newer. So that way, when we build the project, it copies the image to our build path. And so lastly, we'll adjust that, and we can just actually, in this case, we can just use the relative path, the icon for now, and actually later we'll switch this again, but just for now, for testing purposes, we can just use the relative icon.png name as the relative path. And then the last thing I did was add a message box show. So when you click the button, it'll just pop up a message box that says the ribbon button worked, and you can know that everything is working. And really, that's all the pieces you need to sort of make the basic add-in structure and add the button to the ribbon on the add-ins tab so that you can run your add-in when somebody clicks that button in Word. And we can test this out. At this point, all you really have to do is go to the debug menu and choose Start Debugging, or just click F5, and it will open up Word in debug mode. You'll see Word show up. And I opened a document in this case. And once I open that document, you can click on the Add-ins tab, and you'll see that there's now a property editor button there. And if you click that button, you will see that it worked. So that was basically where we stopped the last time. And I'm just going to go back in here and open that up again. Whoops. This is the third demo. Let me go up one more level. Shoot. Whoops. Okay. So I'll open it in VB this time so you guys can see it in VB again, because I know a lot of people are more familiar with VB. Okay, great. So now, again, I've opened this this project up. The project code we're seeing here is a little bit different. What we talked about this last time, this is actually just the functions in visualbasic.net. And so if you want to debug it, you can hit start. It will do a compile, and then it will run the Word. Whoops, it will run Word in my other screen over here. And let's see here. We will, I guess we could just open up anything, really. It doesn't really matter. And then now you'll see that we have the add-ins here. Whoops. Oh, no. Parameter is not valid. Okay, well, I guess there's a bug in my code somewhere now, although this is weird because this worked last time and I have not changed this. So I don't know why we hit that. Somehow it doesn't recognize the bitmap icon. So the icon's missing for some reason. Maybe it's missing from my project. But if you click the button, it actually says it worked. You can see that happen right there. It worked. Do it one more time just to show everybody. Great. Okay, so I'll close this. And if you don't save that, and then it'll stop debugging and you're back in Visual Studio again. So that was everything we got through last time. Are there any questions at this point?
Adrian has a question.
Yeah, sure. On action in VBA, there's terminology that a procedure is a routine, whereas a procedure that returns a value is referred to as a function, whereas a procedure that returns no value, which in C would be public void or whatever void, that would be called a subroutine. I have a suspicion that this question is going to make little sense, because I'm going to say, you said in your on action, it says you have to give a function. Now, I'm presuming by that you mean it has to be a procedure, and it doesn't necessarily, at least, have to return a value. Would that be right?
That's right. Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, I said function. What I really meant was any method, some callback method, something you can call.
Yeah, I don't think other languages have that same distinction.
Right. You don't C#.
Yeah.
Or C++, really. I mean, they're all called functions.
I would argue that VBA and VB.NET and C# are kind of all the same. It's just that you don't have a sub and a function, but one's void or not. They're the same to me. I look at your code. Look, you got a sub and two functions here. So
that's
you
right.
know, you're at home. If you've done VBA, this screen is good. It looks at home. We're at home. We're at home. We're home.
So are you saying that you would recognize that there's a difference between a sub and a function? Or, like a lot of people, would you say they're all the terminology is interchangeable, except in VBA?
I actually think in VBA we distinctively use a sub and we distinctively use a function. And
Yeah.
look at this VB.NET code. It's doing exactly the same thing. And in C Sharp, it's either if you go void, that's a sub. Doesn't return
Right.
anything.
In C
Right.
sharp, there's
They
really
are
no
they are
difference. Right.
my brain sees all three as the same. I do. I think it's fair to say that. Sure.
But I was sort of doing it from the other angles. I don't want to take up too much, Geoff, in as much as
Right. Well, Adrian, you're just saying to be 100% technically correct. Really, what's happening in the ribbon here is
yeah,
we give it a method, these callback methods, and not necessarily functions. Get image is the function because it always returns a
terms.
bitmap
Yeah.
image. On action is not a function; it's a sub because it doesn't require a return value. Is what you're saying? Is that correct, Adrian?
Yes, but they're both the terminology I would use that I've heard is that a procedure, it covers both a subroutine, a function, as well as methods of all types.
Sure. Okay.
All procedures.
Mhm.
And I certainly see what Albert's saying as well. Really, these are all the same thing, especially like in C sharp land, where you don't really have any distinction between a function that returns the value and not, right? Or a procedure, to put it the way Adrian is saying it, returns a function or returns a value or not.
Yeah, and it's
But
just, I
that's
guess, just terminology. It's just sometimes if you're hearing, if you think in one set of terminology and you hear a thing like function, you might assume, as I did, that it meant function
an
as we
actual
do in
function,
VBA,
right?
but
You're
I
right.
just think we have to be a little bit careful to
Sure, absolutely, I agree. I totally agree.
understand.
That's a misspeak on my part, I should say.
I didn't mean it that way, but I just
But
wanted
it's true. It is true. That is true.
Okay.
Okay.
We ready?
Geoff, could you scroll up to the top so I could see the headers real quick?
Oh yeah, sure. Again, so again, in Visual Basic, when you add this custom ribbon, when you go into project, add new item, and you choose ribbon XML and add a new ribbon in the VB file, in the ribbon one VB or whatever you add there, it will have these steps. This is the really nice part. It tells you, these steps tell you what you need to do to make this ribbon template work within your application. So the first thing is, copy the override over. The second thing is create the callbacks. The third thing is assign controls and tags to the ribbon XML. And then basically it's working. And that's what we did through that demo, essentially. Does that all make sense?
Yep.
Okay, good. So that's where we ended last time, and kind of where we stopped was talking about the build files, and that's kind of where I wanted to pick up again, really. If we, so one of the things you got to realize about Visual Studio as opposed to Access, Access is just like a single database, obviously. And when you build it, I guess when you're creating an exe or an ACTE, I should call it, you just output a whole new database. But in Visual Studio land, it's a little bit different. When you build a file, what happens is you get this file in your folder. You get this folder called bin, and it's going to be either release or debug depending on what build flavor. And in fact, you can have other build flavors as well too. But basically, if you go into there, you'll see these are all the files that are built as part of this project. And again, I want to kind of highlight the really important thing is, in my mind, is this VSTO installer, because this VSTO tool does all the registration work to register your add-in with Word. And that was basically everything that Philip was showing in this presentation was basically to get you to this piece right here, basically. So that's one of the really great things about VSTO is that it gives you this installer. All you have to do is sort of, write some code in the Visual Studio Code window, and you can, write whatever Visual Studio code you want, and then set up a ribbon control and make a button click work. And then all of a sudden you have this application that automatically installs and works with the Office apps. And it's really easy to do, and you don't have to worry about trying to figure out what's the right reg keys and all that kind of stuff. So this is basically built from those template files that are part of the VSTO tools. And just to kind of cover everything again, we have the icon that was what's shown on the ribbon. This DLL is like the common DLL, is like the MSO tools, the Microsoft Office tools common DLL. The Word add-in DLL test is our actual add-in itself that we built and compiled. This Word add-in test.dll.manifest is a XML file that basically describes everything in the DLL. This is a debug file that's used by Visual Studio. And actually, I should have mentioned that last time. I actually included this in my installer. This really doesn't need to be included in the installer. You can just, if you're not debugging, you don't really need this. And then there's the VSTO installer, which does the registration with Word for you for your custom add-in. And then this XML just describes the different parts of the assembly. So that's pretty much all the stuff that's built by the custom the VSTO add-in project. And and basically that looks a lot like if we go all the way back to I'll just pull it up in a folder here. You'll notice that these build files look an awful lot like the add-in demo, the final files here. The only things I've really added to the actual distribution package are my add-in and my install and uninstall bat files, and then the Word document editor itself, and then a reg key. But everything else is essentially all built from this VSTO project, basically. So that's how that works. And you got to just remember that the build files, when you compile in Visual Studio, they go to this bin folder inside of your project folder. So let's see here. Okay, and this is, again, we were just talking about the output files. This is, again, just sort of a list of what I just said. And then that basically brings me to the third demo. So,
Geoff, real quick,
the questions?
How do you then install that?
So how do we install those files?
Well, yeah, what you just did, and I apologize, I got here late, so if I missed something, I missed something.
Yeah, well, so that's actually kind of what I'm going to go into next here. All the other little pieces. So if you look at and again, if you just want to install what I tried, not the stuff that we just built in Visual Studio, but like in the first demo, just the full installation package. All you have to do is run the install add-in.bat. That'll run it. And if you look in here, this will tell you all the stuff I do basically during the installation, which is, copy these folders over to a local C drive folder. I set this reg key to basically trust that folder. I then run the VSTO installer, and that does the registration with Word. And that's essentially what my bat file does here. And then the uninstall bat add-in, it just does the reverse of all those things. It deletes all the files it copied over, it removes the reg key, and then runs the uninstall for this VSTO installer. So
I'll just go through the download.
Yeah. So yeah, if you want to try that there, you can. Now, so that was kind of the talk. So that's that kind of the next part I was going to talk about here. When you look at the build files, like you're saying, how do you get this thing to install? Well, if you have these build files, you could just sort of run this VSTO installer file here, this VSTO deployment file. You double click it and run it. That would install on your machine, but that doesn't really get it, for everybody. So you need to do a bunch more stuff to get this build package into a state where it's like in a package like the one I've provided in my first demo, that you can actually distribute it to people and have it be usable for people. And I do want to say one quick thing here. I did kind of cut corners on this distribution package. I cheated a little bit. And what I mean by that is, instead of making a full-blown MSI installer that does all the stuff, I just did it in a batch file. And I partly did that so you guys can see the steps that are necessary, but also because it's a whole other project and I have to re-explain all that stuff too. So just for now, I did it this way instead of doing it with an MSI installer. But typically, you would have a second project in your add-in here, which would be your deployment project, which would build your MSI file for you. And when you would do that, you wouldn't need this bat and you wouldn't need this. And then it would also do the folder registration, the trusted folder registration for you. But again, I sort of did this all in the batch file so that you guys can see all the steps. Let's see, how do I do this? So you can see all the steps that are necessary to actually make this thing work, and without actually having it in an MSN file or an MSI file, excuse me. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. Thank you.
Okay, good. So actually going back here, so we were on the last demo, the third demo. So this is the completed project. So like I said, once we have this, we still have some stuff to get done here. One thing is the access database file. The question is, how do you distribute that? And, obviously we can distribute just an ActDB file to anybody. But in this case, what I did is I went ahead and compiled them to both, an x86 ActDE and an x64 ActDE. And the reason I do that, obviously, if you're distributing this to people it's not a big deal. But if you were distributing this, to anybody in the world, what happens under the covers is we're going to be launching this ActDB file or ActDE file when they click that button on the ribbon. So, if somebody was smart, or somebody knew about this being installed, they could control it, they could replace it, or do a whole bunch of stuff, maliciously to your access ActDB file, and your user might not know that something has changed in there. So typically when you distribute these things to the public, you compile everything and then you sign them all the files, you sign them all with hopefully a public certificate. So that way, if somebody tries to change the file, it breaks the certificate. And then now that's no longer, a secure file or, a valid secure file on that system. And that's why certificates are important. And I didn't go to all that length here, but I just kind of wanted to talk about that real quick ahead of time and why we do that. So let me start this. Oh, actually, I need to open up the third demo here. Okay, so open that. Okay, so again, this is actually, and I'm sorry, I apologize that this is all written in C Sharp, because when I wrote this thing, I didn't know I was giving a presentation on it, and I didn't rewrite it in Visual Basic. So you guys are going to have to unfortunately bear with me on this one a little bit, but hopefully it all makes sense. Again, this is almost identical to the one I showed you in the presentation just a few minutes ago, that walkthrough, which was this one right here. You can see it's all C Sharp. It's basically identical to that. And in this case, I've changed the things a little bit here. I've added a close access method on shutdown. And I kind of want to talk about this startup and shutdown here. So one of the things about these add-ins is that, and it's kind of a drawback, is anytime the client application loads, it has to load your add-in too. So that's like a performance decrease. And I don't know if you noticed it, but like when the word splash screen or when the Excel splash screen comes up, it kind of flips through at the bottom a list of items that it's loading. And one of those things will show is your add-in. So if your add-in takes a long time to load, every time somebody starts up Word, it's always going to take a long time to load Word because it has to load your add-in. So that's something that's really important to consider when you're building these add-ins for any of the Office apps, because it doesn't just necessarily affect when they open a specific document. It affects every time you launch the application. And so in this case, when it starts up, you can use this startup method here, this add-in.startup, to run your code. And when that happens, that means somebody has pressed the Word, the Word icon to start it from the start menu. And then as soon as it starts up, it's going to run your startup code. And then once it's loaded that, it's going to open the document or open the database or open the Excel spreadsheet and go on from there. In this case, we don't do that because instead of running our code from the startup instance within the application, we're going to actually just launch it from the ribbon. So that's why we added our ribbon, and that's why we have this create ribbon extensibility object override. So in this case, what really happens is when Word starts up, it doesn't actually run our startup code. It just runs the underlying methods. And then when it goes to load the ribbon, it calls our ribbon override to get back the image, to load the ribbon image on the add-in ribbon. And then it, loads the document and continues on about its business. And then lastly, when we shut down, that's another issue too. So if you have forms and stuff open, in the application, when you shut down, it's essentially causing your forms to crash because it deletes all the memory when like Word is shut, when Word is shut down. So this shutdown method gives you an opportunity to call some code to basically, close all your windows or shut down your database or whatever your application, whatever your add-in does to shut down. You can call it here and it will hopefully do that before Word or the underlying client application is closed. And so that's important for our case because in this situation, what's happening is when they click the button on the ribbon, it's loading an Access database, and that Access database is staying open in the background all the time. So if somebody were to just close out Word, we're essentially crashing out of Access because it's just ending that task. But since we added this override to the shutdown method, which I'll show you is my close access function down here, what it does is let's see, where is this thing? Okay, is basically when that gets called, I check to see if the Access app is null. So if it hasn't been launched yet, then it won't be set. If it has been launched, if it's not equal to null, we try to quit Access. If it fails, we just blow through that. We just don't even catch it. We just blow through it. And then finally, we just make that null. And then that way, the Word app can close down. So that's why it's important. So to kind of give an example as to why that would be, sorry, we're just coming back from a little problem there. There was a little problem with that demo, but I think we've got it fixed now. Basically, before you start this and try this, you'll need to have the files in the C drive local and under the Word property editor folder. So if you just install the first demo files by running the install addin.bat, you will get all these files here for you. Now, I will say I'm having a little trouble getting this to work right when I run this, when those files are there. So I'm not going to do that in this case. What I'm going to go ahead and do is we'll just go ahead and open up Word and I can show you what I'm discussing here. We'll just go ahead and create a new document. And basically you'll see that on the add-ins tab, we have the add-in there available. So what happens is when we go ahead and launch the Word property editor, what's going to happen is it's going to open up an Access, and Access is actually running in a separate process at this point because Access is its own COM application. If this had been an application that was just part of the form that we had in Word, then if this had been part of the form in the Word add-in application, what would happen is when we close Word, it would crash out of that form. But because this is another COM application and running in Access, when we close out of Word, it would leave Access running in the background with this database. So to make that, to make it close out, when you close out your Word document, we added this ribbon.close access method. You can see this in here down at the bottom. And what happens is when we close Word, the ribbon shutdown code is going to call close access, and then we try to run quit with saving none of the options. And so basically when we come back here, you can see Access is running, but if we were to close here and we don't save, what will happen is now Access will be shut down as well. Otherwise, if we didn't have that shutdown code there, basically Access would have been left open and running in the background and kind of just not hung, but it's not really acting as a Word add-in at that point. So hopefully that makes sense. Okay, let me try this one more time. The reason that didn't work, and I'll just tell you guys right now, is because mainly there's some other drawbacks here in VSTO, which is it doesn't have a way to tell you where things are installed to. Why is it doing that? Okay. Okay. Oh, it was installed. Okay, great. Thank God. It was finally installed. Okay. So so and this is kind of one of the things I had to work around when I build this project for my install. I have to install it to a specific location. If I had used an MSI installer, like I said, that should be done, there would be a reg key set that I could check to get the location of the installation back. But because I use a batch file, I have to copy it to a specific folder. I basically just hard coded the path in here in this thing to this C word property editor folder, which is what my install.bat file sets up for you. Basically, that's where all the files get copied. So if you had built an installer, an MSI installer, you don't have to worry about this. But if you use like a batch file or something, you don't necessarily know where it's been installed to. So I just give it a hard coded path to that installation location. And that's a drawback actually within the VSTO tools. Unfortunately, it's a well-known issue, been an issue the whole time. Is when you install it, all of a sudden somebody's installed it, but you don't know where they have installed it to if they just run the VSTO file. That's why, unfortunately, the VSTO tools only get you about halfway there to creating a full custom distribution package. You still have to somehow distribute all those files, the ones they give you, out to everybody else, and then know how somehow where everything is installed on somebody's machine. So you can do that a couple different ways. I did that with the batch file this time. Okay, sorry, we had another little hiccup there, but we got this worked out now. So basically what I'm saying is another thing you have to do when you're working with these add-ins is you have to consider the usage of how the add-in is working with the client application in a lot of cases. In this case, we want to think about how Access is going to be running, or what the user could do in Access while Word is also still running. So again, another thing to consider, let's just go ahead and open up Word, and I'll create a new document here. And so when we come in here, now, let's just say I'm a normal user. We're going through this. I'm editing my Word document. And I decide, I want to edit my Word document properties. Well, I click here. Now, what's happened is it's launched Access. But the question is now the user might come through here and they might change a few things. And then what are they going to do? Are they going to minimize the app? Are they going to minimize this app? Or are they going to just, are they just going to close it when they're done? That's the question. Or maybe they will just leave it in the background running. So there's sort of like a couple of different scenarios you have to think about here. So, because the next time, now let's say they go back, into the Word document here, they're editing the Word document, they go, oh, wait, I want to change one of those properties. Now, when they hit this again, what's going to happen? Are we going to have two instances of Access running, or are we going to have the same instance? Are we going to just, bring up the current instance? So I've written in some code in the app to do that. Basically, what happens is if Access is already running, then what we do is we just pull forward the current instance of Access. Otherwise, if they had closed out the application, like they came in here, they edited their document, or edited their document properties, I should say, and then they close out Access, the next time they hit this button, we actually have to recreate a new instance of Access to make that happen. So how I've done that here, I have some code down here below. Let's see here. Okay, so it's my launch app code. And so what happens is in this, what we do is if we check to see if it's been started at all before. This is the first time it gets started once they've started running Word. In that case, if it has not been started before, what we do is we have to figure out what the app architecture is, because remember, this is a compiled ACT-E file. So we have to determine if Access is running in 32-bit mode or 64-bit mode. And how I do that up here above is I check the operating system. Is it 64-bit operating system? If it is, then we do this check to see if Access is 64-bit, because don't forget, you can still have 32-bit access running on 64-bit Windows. So you still need to check both Windows, because if Windows isn't, then you know it's 32-bit, and then you have to check access. Even if Windows is 64-bit, is access 64-bit or is it still 32-bit? And how I do that is I came through here and I just checked it against the product code, and I can talk about that in a little bit here. But basically, so once I check to see if access is 32-bit or 64-bit, I figure that out. Once that's figured out, I only do that the first time we run the app. That way, I don't have to redo all these checks again each time it's run. So if this dir is null, I could have used a variable to check this, but if this dir, I had to check the directory that the file's located in. So if this is set, I know I've already checked it, and so that's sort of a little shortcut there that I've done instead of having a separate variable to detect that. So once I know what the app architecture is, then we have to decide, has access been opened already or not? So what I do is I check my access app variable, and this is my variable that's storing, my access app that I'm interoping with in this instance of the word add-in. So if it hasn't been opened, I just create a new instance of access, and then I open up the current database, and I give it the full file path, and then I call this method show window. And that show window is a WinAPI call that you can use to show other windows that are not part of the current application. It's basically any window that you have a handle to that's running on the Windows system. So I just went ahead and passed it the handle of the Access app, basically. And so then it can just maximize that in the face of the user. That way, when they hit the button, it comes up, it shows it. That's the first time if it's never been opened. However, if it has already been opened, I'm going to do basically pretty close to the same thing, actually. So let's say they opened up Word, they edited their document, they opened the Word document editor in Access, and then they minimize it. They minimize it down here, I should say. Well, actually, I don't have it open now, but they click it here, and then they edit their properties, and then they minimize it. Well, in this case, we don't want to create a whole new instance of access. We actually have access still running in the background. So what we're going to go ahead and do is we'll just check to see if the app's visible. If it's visible, we'll go ahead and just maximize the window. If it wasn't visible for some reason, but it's still open, what we would do is we will just set visible to true. I don't know why this would be the case, but maybe it's possible. This is just sort of a redundancy check. Really, it should be visible unless somebody sets it to invisible through code. But this is sort of a redundancy. If it wasn't visible for some reason, we would set it visible and then show and maximize it again, show window to maximize the app in the face. Otherwise, if there was some kind of problem, it was still open, but yet for some reason this variable was not set or something, I have a catch here, and I just catch any exceptions that might be happening. And then if that was the case, I just create a new instance of the access and then open the current database and then show it again. So that's the main code to make sure that, if access has been either closed or minimized, so how you can reopen it again from within the Word document. So that's one of the tricks I used here. And you got to kind of keep like these sort of things in mind when you're creating these add-ins. When somebody clicks the ribbon button, it could have been run before, or maybe it wasn't. So that might be important to your application. The other thing I wanted to mention here is how I check for Access 64-bit version. I found this online. I don't know if this is correct or not. There's no actual PIA method to say, is this 64-bit, as far as I could tell, or that I know about. Maybe you guys know something I don't. But what I found online was just check the 20th position in the product code of the Access version. And if that's a 0, then it's not 64-bit. So that's 32-bit, I guess. If it is 0, if it's not 0, then it will be a 64-bit version. At least that's what it said online. Does anybody know?
I have a question, Geoff. Could this
Yep.
have been avoided if you would have just used the ACCDB
Right,
instead?
exactly. That's what I was saying before. Exactly. The reason I have to do this is because I have it pre-compiled. And why did I pre-compile it? Because if it's going to be a public distribution package to everybody, to people you don't know, then you want to make sure that there's no way somebody can replace your file maliciously. But in this case, if you just wanted to just make an add-in and share it with an ActDB file, you wouldn't even need to check for 64-bit or not. You could just give it the file path.
Right.
Does that make sense? I'm basically, I was just wrapping up. I'm just kind of just showing you guys the last few little things I did to make this all work out just right. So shall I continue forward and finish it
Yes,
up?
please.
Okay, let's get it done. Okay, so aside from that wonderful conversation and that interesting perspective and point of view, basically, in this case, it'll be okay for us to use this to basically launch Access, check and see if it's a 32-bit version or a 64-bit version, and then notice I quit it right away. So when I do this check to do is Access 64-bit down here, which is basically when I launch the app, I'm sorry. Actually, I check it here in get architecture. Oh, sorry, get app architecture, which is which is basically calls into my is Access 32-bit. So first, what I do is I check to see is the operating system 64-bit. If it's not, then we know it's 32-bit by default. Otherwise, if it is 64-bit, we need to check to see, even though Windows is 64-bit, is Access 64-bit or is Access 32-bit installed on 64-bit Windows, which was quite common in the past, less common these days. So basically, I check to see if Windows is 64-bit. If it is, then we check to see is Access 64-bit. I do that with this code by checking the product code within Access. I just open it, and I only do this whole thing the first time I launch the app. So if it's already set, I check this this directory. You could basically make like a Boolean, but because I had to load this directory to check it anyway, I just used whether or not this directory is null or not. If I've already set this directory, it means that I've determined the bitliness of the app. Otherwise, if it's not, I just call into here. If the app path exists, I check to see. Basically, I check to see if I have the right. I get the architecture. I check to see if I have the right path, and then if it doesn't exist, I show an error message. Otherwise, we continue on. If it does exist, we check to see if it's already open, in case somebody's already clicked the button and already opened the app. If it hasn't been opened, we launch a new instance of it. If it has been opened, we just maximize the window. And that's basically everything that runs the app. This whole thing from within this Word add-in. This runs Crystal's document editor from within this add-in. And one other thing I did here, you might notice, I use this function called show window. You guys might recognize that's a Win API call. So one of the things that's a little bit crazy in here, you might not recognize in the code, I do a DLL import on the user 32 DLL. That gives me the call for show window, basically. And that's how you can basically minimize and maximize windows in other processes on a Windows operating system, on a Win32 operating system. So that's basically all the parts to this app. And, I kind of talked about some of the drawbacks there, but that's the last part to just kind of discuss all these little drawbacks. Whoops, where did my presentation? Oh, I closed it. The last thing was basically just to discuss all these little drawbacks in the application, within VSTO. Okay, so here's the thing. So basically, one of the things I mentioned to you is that when you use the VSTO installer, it doesn't really tell you where the code has been installed to. It's basically just doing a registration process. So, that's one of the issues that I really run into. And I know that's a big problem for a lot of people that use COM. If you look it up on the internet, you can see that people have asked various questions about basically VSTO and finding local paths, to the code that they actually wrote, and there's just no way to do that. Another problem that a lot of people run into with these COM add-ins is that there's loading issues, and especially for non-VSTO ones, it's a really big deal. So I don't know if there's differences in reg keys between versions or something like that, but I know a lot of people have said that they installed a Word add-in and they upgraded Word, and now all of a sudden their old add-ins no longer work. And basically they've been told that either they can't get a new version of it, or it's a problem with Word, or it basically just blows up in their face. So that was a notoriously big problem, is these COM add-ins having load issues. And that's actually probably why in Word and in all the other apps, you'll notice that you can go in there and you can disable whether you want the Word add-in to be loaded each time or not. In case there's a problem with it, you can just disable it. So obviously, even Microsoft is aware of this issue. Also, COM is not supported in the new Outlook stuff, obviously, only in classic Outlook for the desktop only. And another issue with the COM is they're just really only supported on the desktop products, not the web products, not the phone products, just the desktop products. It's another problem is you're required to be dependent on a whole bunch of different tools. Like, for example, if you make a COM add-in for Word through VSTO, you're dependent upon Office, you're dependent upon the VSTO tools, you're dependent upon .NET Framework, and probably Windows as well, just to make a COM add-in. So that's 4 pretty heavy dependencies, and it's going to be true anytime you use those. And even if you don't use the VSTO tools, you're still dependent upon Office and .NET, or maybe your compiled code, maybe you're using compiled to COM code. So there's always a bunch of dependencies in there when you build these COM add-ins. The add-ins always load when the target application is opened. And it's funny, actually, because Phil said yesterday, I noticed this, I didn't realize this, that there was some options you could do for like load on the first time, or just always load. But when you use the VSTO tools, I couldn't see anywhere you could set any options like that. It's like it just uses the one option of always load when the application loads. So if your COM add-in takes a while to load, it's going to slow down every time somebody tries to launch that client application like Word or Excel or whatever. And the VSTO tools, I mentioned they do not provide a way to get the install location. They also do not provide a way to determine if MS Office is 32-bit or 64-bit. And obviously, the VSTO tools are in .NET, and they're meant to be compiled to the bytecode, not to a specific architecture. So maybe they didn't think about that, but that's actually a real issue for Access, obviously, considering that when you do compile Access, you have to know whether you're installing it to a 32-bit or a 64-bit version. So that's really important and a big drawback for Access, unfortunately. And actually, I should say not even just Access. Like if you had custom DLLs in there that were compiled, or COM DLLs or something like that were compiled to a specific flavor, that would be a big problem for those as well. And then the requirements for a public distribution package of a COM add-in are extremely heavy. I've showed you what it took me to just make this package, and I haven't even really completed everything. Really, the files in the package should be signed that with a certificate, all of them, if you're going to do a public distribution, for security purposes, in case somebody, tries to munge your files or change those files. You just want to make sure that nobody can hack your code. And the problem with doing that is that self-certificates are okay, but that's kind of dubious too at the same time, right? Like anybody can just generate their own self-certificate on their computer and then sign their package with it. And of course, somebody else could create another self-certificate with the exact same name and sign the package with it. And then from your standpoint, like when you launch those, both those certificates look the same to you because it doesn't tell you an ID. It just tells you the name and that it's unverified in Windows. So, somebody could even spoof your certificate if you use a self-certificate, and that's tough. So really paid public certificates are the only really way to go when you're signing files, so you can be sure that whenever you install that file, or whenever somebody installs that file, they'll see your name come up and that it's verified, and that you're not getting warnings from Windows that you're installing something, malicious on your machine. So the last couple things here, just to kind of mention the drawbacks. COM Add-Ins are continued to be supported for now, but for how long in the future, it's unclear. COM is not officially deprecated, but these COM Add-Ins actually are deprecated by Office for the new add-in model that's being pushed, currently, and it actually works with the other clients as well, not just the desktop clients. So, the problem with this is definitely a problem in my mind with these VSTO COM Add-Ins is that Microsoft is slowly phasing out COM technologies in one way or another. Eventually, these may stop working, may no longer work. Obviously, they don't work with the new Outlook already. So that's something to be aware of in the future. Who knows how long that will be before you can no longer use them. And then the new model add-in. Oh yeah, that's the future, right? That's the future, is basically you want to use the new add-ins. And actually, I should say there's one more drawback here that I forgot to talk about, which is the security flaws of COM. So another problem with COM is that there's a lot of security issues in it. It's basically, riddled with security issues, and why they decided to, stop making COM and go with .NET, where it has code to check for things, overflows and that kind of stuff. And so, that's another problem I see with COM, is there's just so many security issues. You could write this thing in COM or, use the COM add-ins, but there could be a security issue that could affect that in your application. So it's, again, the future of COM is uncertain. And so there's a lot of drawbacks here. And so I want you all to be very careful before you decide to make COM add-ins going forward. That's basically my takeaway from this whole thing.
Geoff, this is an interesting discussion as far as COM add-ins, but to me that begs the question. There are many ways to get what I'll call foreign code into Access. One of those is a COM add-in.
Yeah, you're right.
Another one of those is a DLL, or a library reference.
You're right.
What happens, or what about using Visual Studio to create a DLL that you can reference from COM instead?
Right. So that's kind of the whole point of, why even make these COM applications for Access in the first place when you could just make an ACTA file that can call a DLL, or, a .NET DLL, COM DLL, or any other type of thing. All the stuff that Access can work with, you can call all that stuff from an Access application. So why do you even really need, these COM add-ins for Access, right? It's not necessary. And I assume that's why they never made these VSTO plates for Access, because really, if you're using Access, it's just going to be easier and better to just create an ACTA file and then, call any COM code or .NET code or anything else from that file, as opposed to trying to make this third tool that's outside of Access and really outside of Office completely, and then integrate that in. That's my assumption about, why these, add-ins, these COM add-ins were really never made for Access directly, like the other Office apps were.
What I'm saying is forget an ACCDA, just set a DLL reference that is COM callable in VBE.
I'm sorry. I'm confused. What's the question?
The question is, why not? There are many ways to get foreign code, if you will, into Access, and those include an add-in, as we've been discussing, and other methods. But what if that foreign code, if you will, is compiled into a DLL that simply can be referenced, just like
simply reference from Access
scripting?
Well, you would still have to add it through VBE. That's a manual task. I guess you could write some code to manually add a reference or something like that. But that's another thing about the .NET DLLs versus the old COM DLLs. Like the old COM DLLs aren't really versioned, so you can replace one COM DLL with another one, and you really don't know the difference of that per se. But like in .NET, that's why back in the 90s, you guys in the early 2000s, you guys remember what they called DLL hell, basically, where there's all these DLLs, they all have the same names, they're all sort of conflicting with each other. And how they overcame that in .NET was that all DLLs and stuff are versioned now. So if you set a reference to one DLL and somebody was like switch that or somehow maliciously change that DLL, that would change the idea of it, and so therefore it would no longer be a valid reference. Does that make sense? Hello?
Yes,
Yep.
but
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay.
it's beside the point, which is why not? I mean, if we're developing this code in C# or VB.NET, why not compile it as a DLL? Just reference it in
The VBIDE.
access, and then which is trivial, because I mean, I've written the procedures myself to conditionally add references, but why not just put that foreign code that we're developing that we want to get into Access into a DLL that simply can be referenced by Access?
Yeah, absolutely. You could totally do that.
Yeah, that should be possible. I think, has anybody done that? I'm sure.
So
Albert's quite desperate to get
not only do I do that, I did it yesterday. I do it constantly.
Every day,
Okay.
right?
I actually
Phil Stifle says that nobody does that.
I'm working on that now.
Now I want to specify.
I'm doing it all the time myself. I know I'm doing it all the time.
I want to specify
when an Access guy tells me that nobody's doing that.
Yeah.
I'll mention one thing that should be explained. You have two types of DLLs that you want to call from Access. You have the ones where you do the, create instance of an application, like create an instance of Outlook, create an instance of Word. And when you generally write classes or code in .NET, you also use create object in VBA code if you've done it that way. But remember some of the older libraries like the Soundex, and there was a few from Stefan Lebens, who haven't heard that name in years, where you actually do the declare pointer, and you do a declare inside the VBA editor, and it's a direct reference to the DLL. Okay? We've done both, right? So you do that with the APIs, the old file API and what. So that is what he's talking about when he says, why not just reference directly a DLL? Well, you can actually also do that in .NET, and I do that also. So I don't have to use create object. But I also use 100% COM-free registration because it's too much of a deployment hassle.
Right.
So the way my code works now is anytime I want a DLL from .NET, I just toss it in the folder, and the way my code calls it from VBA, it works. And you don't have to do anything at all.
Now, can I just take
would love to see how you do
Eric's question? Because we've all recognized the question, but no one's actually answered it. In what way is it better to use VSTO and COM instead of doing that similar work in a DLL?
I'll answer that. I'll answer that for you, Geoffrey.
That's the point of the question.
I'll tell you what, if you look what Geoffrey did, he showed us some great examples, and notice he kind of told us that if you're doing a Word add-in, an Excel add-in, use the VSTO tools. But notice in no case did he show an Access example. He actually kind of said that if you're doing Access, it's not such a great idea because they don't have a VSTO add-in tools for Access. They really don't.
You don't have a template? No, indeed.
No, they don't.
But that still doesn't answer the question.
Geoffrey mentioned that last month as well, if I recall correctly. Yeah.
So the answer is we don't.
But actually, hold on. There is a good answer to the question here. There is a very good answer to the question. So why wouldn't you just make the DLL instead of ever using an add-in is basically what the question is. What Adrian's asking, what people are asking here. There is one good answer for that. So the thing about having a DLL is when you have a DLL referenced in your VBA project, that is specific only to that specific database or VBA project, I should say, right? But with an add-in, that's global to the application, the Access or the Word or Excel client itself. So it doesn't actually have to have a document loaded or a database loaded or anything, any VBA project loaded to have your add-in code loaded. Does that make sense?
So would that be about load times and a load efficiency?
Well, there is that. That's what I was saying about, you're always going to have to consider the load efficiency whenever you use an add-in, because every time you start the application, not just open, anytime you ever open Word, that add-in is now running each time you load it, right? And that's not just for a document, that's just every time you open Word. That's why I say that's an efficiency concern right there. And that's one of the drawbacks.
So if you had a project,
an issue for something like Excel, where you're opening any number of random spreadsheets for different purposes, but is probably less so for Excel. I would add that you can achieve that effect with code by providing for that in the launch of Access applications.
Right. You can make your add-in as minimal as possible on load. So again, going back to the code that we had, actually, let me just flip back to my code. Did I still have it open? Okay, good. Right. So again, this is why we run everything from the ribbon right here, and then there's nothing in our startup code right here. So if there was something in the startup code, every time Word starts, it would have to run whatever is in this method here. And that's a performance decrease. And actually, even when it starts up, it still has to run all this, but it's already loading the ribbon anyway, and this is pre-built in, so it's just loading the ribbon, so it doesn't take very long at all. But that's one of the biggest problems with, people's complaints about, using add-ins with COM apps, is that every time that application starts, before you've even done anything in it, it's taking a whole bunch of time to load and run this code there. So that's very important to consider when you're building your add-ins.
So, Albert, do you mind if I just go double back on something? I know you've got something to say, and I'm sure it's going to be interesting, but I don't find that this answer has fully answered the question. One of the things that, actually, if I could very quickly go back to what I was going to say before, if we're happy that we've moved on from that, because I think we're so close to finishing.
Let's get back to it.
With you, Geoff, and or you, Albert, you were comparing it to a project which has a reference in. Now, when a project is loaded that has a reference, presumably that DLL file gets loaded. If you have another project with the same reference, does it get loaded again, or is it only ever flagged as, right, this is now loaded and it's available?
Every time you load the project, it does check the references. So like if the reference wasn't there and you try to load the project, you would get an error in VBA, right?
Sorry, I'm talking about. I'm not talking about anything complicated like unavailable references. I'm talking about got a DLL file. It's in your references for project A. If you load that project, presumably then that DLL gets loaded into the system. Now, if you load project B, it also has a reference to that same DLL file. Does that DLL get loaded again, or does it recognize that that DLL is already available and they share that same code?
We're talking about a VBA reference, aren't we? Where you've got a DLL in the same folder as the current project.
It's a VBA reference to a DLL.
Yeah, and that DLL, I typically just stick it in the same folder as the current project because I'm not expecting to be able to use with
But that doesn't answer my question,
Ken.
In fact, it doesn't go to doesn't really cover the area.
Well, you can put a DLL in a like a Windows folder that every application can get it, but yeah, or you can just stick the DLL in the same folder as the AccessUserGroups.org. That's
but
two
that
ways
still
to do
doesn't
it.
answer what I'm trying to find here is, does it get loaded as part of every project? In other words, it gets loaded multiple times, or if you have multiple projects with reference to the same DLL, is it loaded only the once and every subsequent project says, oh, I recognize that's already been loaded, so I won't load it again? That's the question.
Can you have multiple projects open in VBE at the same
in
time?
Excel, you can. You can have loads of Excel projects open.
Oh, you mean in different instances?
Yeah, or
Not
different.
necessarily. It
Oh,
could be two different projects with the same. Albert, I think you've got an answer.
yeah, there's two things. We want to separate the concept of that separate DLL that you referenced versus the add-in. The add-in loads when you launch the project Word or loads
That's
when you
why I'm
launch
asking the
Excel.
question,
But
Albert.
but in the case of say we don't use an add-in and we go to a DLL, okay, that we're referencing in our code externally. If you have
Yes.
two different projects and you launch both of them, they're both going to get a copy.
Right, that answers my question. Thank you.
Okay.
That all pertains
Where-
back to Eric's
Where do you have to
question
put the
earlier.
DLL for that
Hang
to
on a
happen?
second, Ken. I'll be with you. That all goes back to Eric's question earlier about whether it's better to use, what advantages the add-ins have over the DLLs. And one is that multiple DLL can be loaded multiple times, and that's not good for a system. Kent, please. Kent?
Sorry, I had to get unmuted. So if you stick a DLL in the same folder as your project, in the same folder as the AccessDB, right, and your VBA reference just knows about there's a DLL and you don't provide it with the path, it just finds it in the same folder. And that's being referenced by that VBA project. Now, you could also create a DLL that you put in your Windows objects folder and
Like
you
a
give a
System
path to it.
32.
Yeah, and then all of your projects can reference that DLL. So there's two ways of doing it. But my question for Albert was I've always found that you had to COM enable the DLL, but you mentioned before that you can do it without COM enabling the DLL.
That is correct. I should probably do a presentation on that.
That's right.
Remember,
You should
I've
do a
got an
presentation
opening
on
in
this, Albert.
March.
yeah, I should because no, there's two types. You remember, when you do the declare function API DDL blah blah.
Yeah.
Well, then in your code, you just call the code. You don't go create object. Then there's a COM. A COM DLL is the one where you go create object, create instance of Word, create instance of Excel or Outlook.
Create object only works when it's pre-registered on the system.
Well, you can do COM pre-registration. I have a loader. I don't do that.
Yeah. Okay. Right. So that's
That's a different.
It is
That's
registered.
even different than those reference DLLs, though. There's two
Right.
types.
That's true.
And a reference DLL is not a .NET DLL. It's a Win32 with entry points. But
That's
there's
right.
a way of creating those from Visual Studio, and I do it all the time.
There's also
I was
a way
confused
to
by
register
Kent's question.
a DLL when compiling it in Visual Studio. There's a way to register it by signing it. I'm a little bit fuzzy on this. I'm several weeks away from the last time I touched it. But when you're creating a COM callable wrapper of a .NET class, there's a particular process that you can go through to register that to be essentially distributable.
You don't need to sign it. Yeah, I don't sign
Exactly.
all mine. They all work everywhere. It's the Office add-in's a little different. But
Well,
COM,
you don't have to sign the Office add-in either, but you don't have to sign any of the DLLs. With COM DLLs to work as a reference, like you're talking about, you have to have like an OCX, right, that describes the DLL.
Yeah, I'm talking about, it's called strong naming.
Yeah, the strong name, right?
yeah, I don't even bother with that.
If you take any .NET DLL though and dump it into the GAC, the Global Assembly Cache, which is essentially like the Win32 folder for .NET, then it's actually pre-registered. When you drop it into that folder, it registers that .NET DLL on the system so that you can just call those classes up without even having to really reference the DLL.
Yeah. As a side note, I don't register any of my DLLs. I put them in the same folder as Access.
Yeah,
but
that's
that's a
right.
presentation. That's a
That's
presentation. By the way,
If it's in the same
Geoffrey,
folders.
Okay.
I just wanted to say thank you very much. I learned some really cool tricks, and I have
Awesome.
one short little question. Your
Absolutely.
VSTO examples you had, one was for Word, and the other was it for Excel? I'm not sure.
No, they're all for Word. They're all
Thank
for
you.
Word.
Okay. Have you taken a look at that little template and hacked it a bit to see if I could use that code to create a ribbon in Access, or you've not bothered?
You know, it's funny. After Phil's presentation yesterday, I was thinking that I personally could just build my own little project template for Access, just like this, like a Word one, but like for Access, right?
That was my
But
question. And
but
I don't know if it's worth it, but it would be, because then we would get a nice template for creating ribbons.
exactly, just for playing around with purposes, right? I
Well,
mean,
actually, for building some ribbons, that would be an advantage, actually, in some
yeah,
cases. Anyway, just ask if you hacked it a bit.
I
Okay.
have not done that
Okay.
yet.
Jeffrey, are we at a place where you can
Yeah,
kind of-
let me just say the last, there's one more slide. The very, very, very last slide for you guys is just some resources, really easy. Download the presentation, the Visual Studio homepage, getting started with VSTO add-ins, the architecture of VSTO add-ins, Office add-in platform overview, creating add-ins for Office, and then one for creating, they have articles for creating each of the apps. Now, this MS Outlook one, it may be old now, deprecated. It was still up there, but I don't know if this really still works with the new Outlook. It probably works with the old Outlook. And then creating custom ribbon buttons, and then there's the new model. And I was going to say, my last thing I was going to say is, now that we've done all these add-ins, I really feel like somebody should do a presentation on the new add-ins.
Oh God, no.
So we can see what people have been doing for the last 10 or 15 years.
Yeah. All right. So on that note, I will turn off the recording. Thank you so very much, Geoff.
Thank you, George.
And everybody else who contributed. This has been a very powerful presentation as well as interesting. So, and you managed to keep me up well past my bedtime again. So,
oh no, sorry,
And
George.
me.
It's past 8 p.m.
So, and again, thank you. I'm going to turn off the recording.